the first reaction from President Trump to the guilty plea from his one-time lawyer, Michael Cohen.
Read it.
This is, it's interesting. This is Donald Trump writing. If anyone is looking for a good lawyer, I would strongly suggest that you don't retain the services of Michael Cohen.
Are you sure that's Donald Trump writing?
There are no spelling errors there. Strongly suggest doesn't sound like the president. I guess it's a somewhat amusing response to a very serious moment in this presidency. Michael Cohen stood in an open courtroom yesterday under oath and basically said the president directed me to break the law. Let's get the bottom line on all of this. Carl Bernstein joins us right now. He was part of the Washington Post team reporting on Watergate. Carl is now a CNN political analyst. And Carl, look, this happened yesterday when Michael Cohen stood up and basically said the president directed me to break the law. People said, not since Watergate have we seen something like this. Your reaction?
Well, as you know, I've said before that what we're seeing is worse than Watergate, because in Watergate, the system worked. And until yesterday, when we finally saw some action in the judiciary, in the judicial branch, in which the rule of law has apparently had real effect, the system has not been working. But more than anything, what we're seeing now is the egregious conduct of the man who is the president of the United States, with no regard for the rule of law before he was president, in his campaign, or as president of the United States. And that's what makes this whole situation so dangerous.
What does it mean that the president of the United States is now an unindicted co-conspirator in the breaking of a federal law?
Well, there's the political dimension of it, and there's the legal dimension of it. We've got a long way to go, and we need more information, and that's what the Mueller investigation is all about. And this is no witch hunt, as almost any fair-minded person ought to be able to see with great clarity now. It is anything but a witch hunt. It is an attempt to get at the truth. And what the truth that we are learning, we're beginning to understand why the President of the United States, Donald Trump, has covered up, since he took office, almost everything having to do with his response in terms of the facts regarding the Mueller investigation, and to try to make the issue the conduct of the Mueller investigation, the FBI, Hillary Clinton, the Democrats, the deep state, rather than his own egregious conduct, including in this cover-up and obstruction of justice that Mr. Mueller obviously has a very strong case on, but also the whole question of, quote, Mr. Trump keeps saying no collusion, no collusion, no collusion. The evidence would point to anything but what he is saying. The Trump Tower meeting at which his son attended and said, I love it, when told by representatives holding out the possibility of Russians providing information, the Russian government, on Hillary Clinton to the Trump campaign. That meeting in Trump Tower was an open invitation to collusion. The people around him, Mike Flynn, among others, seemed to be accused of collusion, the former national security advisor. This investigation will tell us, if Trump allows it to go forward, the extent and whether or not that collusion extends to the President of the United States himself.
On the Trump Tower meeting, because there is some new information on that, and you had done some reporting. And the reporting was that Michael Cohen had been telling people that he was willing to testify to Robert Mueller, that Donald Trump had knowledge of the Trump Tower meeting beforehand. The President of the United States now had knowledge of the Trump Tower meeting beforehand. Well, now, I just spoke to Lanny Davis. He was on TV. Lanny Davis is saying that's not the case. Michael Cohen doesn't have information exactly that President Trump knew beforehand. And Richard Burr of the Intelligence Committee yesterday and Mark Warner came out and said they went back and reached out to Cohen's people to recheck that point on testimony he made to the effect that he had no knowledge of it, and that testimony still stands.
I don't know what Mr. Cohen actually knows and what is in his head. I believe what we reported was that people on his behalf were saying that he wanted to tell the prosecutors that he knew that Trump had advanced knowledge of that meeting. But in terms of what the actual facts are, as opposed to what his representatives and people purporting to be speaking for and about him with knowledge of what he supposedly knew and was, quote, shopping around at the time when he wanted to get a meeting with the prosecutors, that's as far as the story went. But in terms of what the actual facts are, that's exactly why he needs to be thoroughly interrogated by the prosecutors and by the Congress as well.
Carl, we have already heard some Republicans begin what I believe will be the talking point today, which is you can't trust Michael Cohen. He has had different stories. He's a known liar. Look, he's a convicted felon. I mean, that one is rich. He's a convicted felon because he just told the truth in a court case and pled guilty to it. But in any event, that's what they're beginning to say. And what should Americans know about that talking point?
I think what Americans need to do is to pay as much attention as they can, just as those of us in the media need to pay as much attention as we can to the factual record as it emerges through these very, very complicated events. And they are very complicated to parse. But the fact is that indeed, Mr. Cohen is a liar, has been a liar. And that point has to be conceded. However, it is unthinkable, at least from the years that I covered the courts and the judiciary, to think that experienced prosecutors would accept this plea and put in the pleadings themselves the language that they did without having corroboration to some extent from Cohen's notes, from audio recordings. They have, as we know, millions of documents from the raid on his offices, on his computer devices. So I think it's a fair assumption that his information has been checked out pretty well. And when he says, also, we heard a bit of it ourselves in the audio recording that was released a couple weeks ago, that both Mr. Giuliani and Mr. Avenatti and others have all discussed on the air. That recording itself goes somewhat toward what we're talking about today. But I think it's you've got to think the prosecutors know what they're doing here.
Carl Bernstein, really great to have you with us this morning to put this in the bigger perspective here. Again, a man in open court under oath just said the president told him to break the law. Carl, thanks very much.
Thanks, Carl.